Hello everyone, I hope you can guys see me and hear me okay. I'm Antonio Tejada, the Managing Director of Capita Translation and Interpreting. Just to make sure that we got good sound and the image is okay. If some of you who are already in the call could just put a quick message on the Q&A section just to say that you can hear and see, and then that'll be great. So we just do the, yeah, all good. Thank you, Michelle. That's wonderful. Welcome everyone to our first webinar of 2021. Delighted to have you guys with us today. Just some formalities around how the system works. You got a live event Q&A. What we will be doing while Helene is presenting is you guys can put in any questions you want. They'll get all to me here. I'll be able to push them through, and then once Helene finish, we will enter a Q&A session. So all the questions will be just put online. You can just write them up, and I'll be able to then pass them on to Helene when the presentation is concluded. Thank you again for joining us. We're going to give it a minute just for those who might be just joining now. Let me just tell you why we're doing this presentation today. We have at the moment engaging around 6,000 linguists in total in Capita Translation and Interpreting. We work with many of you guys, some of the best translators in the world. We have also a large number of interpreters, particularly in the UK, with whom we engage on a daily basis. And sometimes we feel we might not do enough on maybe having opportunities to chat to you guys, to also drive different levels of conversations and discussions. And we thought it would be good this year to start our first webinar of the year, rather than being a more client focus or more related to a particular industry or a particular service. We've asked Common Sense Advisory, with whom we've partnered for a number of years, and we engage regularly on different research in relation to the market and to the trends in different areas of our business. We've asked them, as they've just published the new Linguist Landscape report, we thought it would be great to have them coming in as guests, and Helene will be sharing, this is one of her favorite reports. I know she really likes this one, and she really likes giving you some insights around what are the findings of the report. Obviously, this is a very important year for a survey like this one, because we do recognize that it's been a very different time. 2020 with COVID and the pandemic has been very different, and that's going to have an effect on how we all work. And we just wanted to share with you some of those experiences, and then open up a conversation so we can all gain from having a discussion around how we think the linguist landscape it's around the world. So I think we've given it a few minutes for people to join, and I don't want to be holding on too much, without passing on to the real knowledge from Helene. So I've known Helene for a number of years. We've met in different lock walls, and she is passionate about languages. Obviously, like myself and like many of you in the call, she's also a linguist. And I know, again, this is one of the surveys and one of the reports that she really enjoys. So I'm sure you're going to be delighted with some of the information that she's going to share, or at least I think it's going to be quite enlightening, some of the data that they've gathered as they've interviewed over 7,000 linguists. So I think we're just going to, Helene, if you're ready, we just pass you on the button and you can take control.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Antonio. I very much appreciate the invitation and the opportunity to talk to all of you. So again, my name is Elaine Pilmeyer. So I'm the senior analyst at CSA Research, who oversaw the large-scale study we conducted on translators and interpreters across the world to gauge where they're at in this day and age. Let me just briefly tell you about CSA Research in case you're not familiar with us. And really briefly here, we're a market research firm. We're dedicated to the language services industry. We survey and interview the different constituencies that you can see on screen here. We are fully independent, and that means that no one pays us to write anything about them. We write what we believe are the topics to write about and how to approach them. What really makes us special is that we brought the best practices of market research to the language services sector. We have a very strong data science team where we do a lot of work about sample size, sample composition, and always making sure there is a true cause and effect between two different variables that we assess. And for this specific study, to ensure comprehensiveness and a representative sample in our survey of translators and interpreters, we knew that we had to cast a very wide net. So we actually partnered with various organizations to promote the survey with translators and interpreters in their network. Pros.com added notifications within that platform that generated literally thousands of responses. And then Translators Without Borders actively promoted the survey to its diverse community of linguists that has a strong representation in countries that are otherwise a little more difficult to reach for us in terms of market research. The list is too long for us to mention everybody, but Translators and Interpreters Association jumped in. So we want to thank all of these partners and all of you on the call who participated on the survey, if you did, because that means you saw value in the research, and that's really helpful for us then to be able to share some good insights with you. So to frame the data, I'll be presenting a little bit about what the survey entailed. Number one, it was a very long survey. We asked 64 questions that drilled down into topics such as the demographic details, of course, of people, the behaviors, the attitudes, and the challenges that these translators and interpreters were facing. We offered the survey in 14 languages. Translators Without Borders actually added some languages to our original list, and they did that to ensure we captured enough responses from some specific geographies. And then while many of the linguists can read English, still over a quarter of them participated through one of the translated versions. But I've got to tell you some funny stories about that, since there are a lot of you linguists on the call here today. So for example, in the Russian survey, in the free text answer, we'd find answers in Chinese and lots of permutations like that. So for us research analysts to process free text answers from translators was kind of a fun exercise, but I wouldn't necessarily do that every day, because you guys can be a little challenging pushing the limits of, what language you can fill a survey in. But we managed to process every single answer. And then we were actually really proud to announce that by the end, we had over 11,000 translators and interpreters who started the survey, and a little over 7,300 that went to the very end of the long questionnaire. And I want to tell you a little bit more about who these people were so that the data makes more sense when you see it on the next slide. So 75% of the respondents were freelancers, and then we had 13% that worked in-house, either on the client side or the LSP side. So of course, this doesn't add up to 100. So what was the rest? The balance were either people who were retired just doing a few hours here and there, or some students that were trying to get into the profession. Now this map shows the number of responses by country. You can see that we really covered the globe. And we actually got responses from 178 countries. And when we counted the respondents' primary language combinations, it told 155, and that's not too shabby. I hope you'll agree with me on that. We had 2/3 of respondents that were women, and in terms of age range, we really wanted to capture the whole spectrum from newbies to veterans, and then you can see that we managed to nicely distribute the participation. And hopefully, from this slide, you'll conclude that we had an extremely strong sample that covers a variety of profiles and geographies. And I want to mention that all the results of this research are available for free on our research platform. I have somebody here who's going to drop the link for you in the chat so that you can bookmark it and read the report later at your convenience if you want to dive into some of the findings some more. The report actually covers a whole lot more than what I can cover in this webinar. Now, I have to admit that the Linguist survey was conducted before the pandemic, but that's not to say that we haven't captured trends since. We've actually launched 12 surveys already to keep the pulse of how various audiences are doing as they're dealing with the effects of COVID-19. Again, all the results are available for free on the link that you see on screen and that we're dropping in the chat too for you. And all of that, it's close to 3,900 viewpoints that we were able to take into account to tweak our analysis of the market. And now for the rest of the presentation, I'm going to walk you through data at a pretty good clip. What I want you to focus on is the story the data tells, because you can always dive into the data later using either of those two links, because all the data I'll be showing is available in the free research. I'm just presenting it differently than what you'll see in there, but it's all in there. Okay, now that I give this long introduction, you know where all this data is coming from, let's start with the data, and let's start with the linguist experience. So while we try to also capture newbies to the profession, nearly 3/4 of the respondents have over 5 years of experience. And that 5-year threshold is of particular interest to LSPs and clients because that is typically the minimum years of experience they require when recruiting new talent. And the data shows how incredibly educated of a workforce it is, with over half of them who have a master's degree or above. So we have a highly experienced and highly educated workforce. You'd think that being a linguist makes for a great career, right? Well, it turns out that only under half of respondents work 30 hours or more, either translating or interpreting, and that leaves a lot of part-timers and occasional workers. So the big question is, how does that convert into earnings? And that is where the story gets a little bit sad. So this highly educated workforce isn't earning that much. The height of the bubble in this graphic shows the number of respondents that fell in a certain revenue bracket, and then the size of the bubble, the percentage of respondents that they represent. On average, linguists earn $29,000 per year before taxes. And I did the computation this morning, since a lot of you are in the UK, and that's about just under 21,000 pounds. And then 1 in 5 respondents earn less than 5,000 annually, and that's about 3,500 pounds. And that makes translation a source of supplemental income more than a career in many geographies. And that is why many of the linguists have a second job. And it turns out that 38% of respondents reported having another job either inside or outside the language services industry. The big question is why? 92% like diversifying what they do, and that was a common theme in the responses throughout the survey. But look at this next figure here. Nearly 2/3 of these people with another job feel that their other job is their main job. And that means that their translation or interpreting work is not their primary source of income. Again, why is that? So 64% don't feel that their language services income is enough to live on by itself. But is it really the fault of the language services industry? Maybe only to a degree, because 56% of them say that they work as linguists to supplement the income from their other job. And that implies they don't earn quite as much as hoped for in those other professions, and language services is the solution to use their talent and make some extra cash. And as an FYI, the top categories of other jobs that we identified were teachers, in-house linguists, and LSP workers. Admittedly, the situation got a bit more complicated with the pandemic. So as of August last year, 55% of freelancers were reporting a drop of income. And in the survey that we just recently closed, we see that number is now at 52%. But that drop is not spread out evenly. When we look at the average losses back in August, interpreters were affected significantly more than their translator counterparts. It's been really hard for in-person interpreters not to be able to come on site to do their job. Now, you can see that revenue losses are decreasing a little bit, although there remains a long way to go, in particular for interpreters that remain more affected than the translators. Now, moving on to another aspect of the research, we found out that a little over half of respondents sometimes work into another language than their mother tongue. However, on average, respondents perform 3/4 of their work into their mother tongue. And upon further inspection of the respondents' data, we discovered that working into a different language occurs primarily when interpreting, when linguists are in countries where many people identify as bilingual from birth, like so for me in the United States, there's a lot of people that identify both as English and Spanish speakers from birth. And then the third scenario was when dealing with languages where there are very few linguists that are available to translate into the less common direction. So for example, Marathi into English, few translator, versus English to Marathi, a little more. So those were examples when we found these other language directions. Okay, now we also asked about preferred project and preferred client types. Nearly half of translators like projects of any size. However, mid-sized jobs tend to be preferred. Large projects can make it difficult to juggle the needs of regular accounts, and then small projects can mean too much administrative work for the pay. And about 2/3 prefer working for commercial clients. And when it comes to working with LSPs, size does matter. 51% like working for the mid-sized ones, 47% for the small ones, and only 40% for the larger providers. Why? Well, vendor platforms and negotiation techniques can make the work unpleasant for linguists, and therefore they might prefer organizations where there's more or less tools and a little bit more of a relationship building with the project managers. Linguist performance when delivering services can link to their understanding of clients' preferences. So we asked linguists what they perceive client care the most about. Probably no surprise there. The top answer is for cost over quality. So 40% of respondents fell in that group. Second, that's speed, where 1/3 perceive that clients care more about it than quality. And then quality came in last, with just over 1/4 of respondents who believe that clients care about it more than speed. And maybe you feel it corresponds to reality and maybe you don't, but perceptions can affect deliverables if you feel that, for example, meeting a client deadline is more important than doing the extra research to nail a tough concept. So important to consider the impact here. I want to move on to the technology side. About half of the respondents feel tech savvy and only 7% don't feel very confident with new technology. And the translation industry is continuously adding new software to support linguist work, thereby making the profession very tech oriented. And this requires freelancers to keep up with technology advances and learn new products on their own. And I'll cover both translation and interpreting technology, but I'm going to start with interpreting. At the time we conducted the survey, about 1 in 5 interpreters preferred to interpret remotely, meaning doing telephone, video, or remote simultaneous interpreting. But it's a big change for those who were used to working in person. 3/4 of respondents miss in-person interactions when working in a virtual environment. But let's not just look at the negative here. 39% reported being able to focus better when working online, and 36% said they do a better job online. Now, that was before COVID, and things changed fast for interpreters. We see that about 2/3 of freelance interpreters foresee customers increasing their use of remote interpreting even after COVID. And we actually calculated the average percentage of freelance interpreters who observed the growth of remote interpreting before the pandemic, at its height, and then now, which was when we closed the survey at the end of January. Now, the orange line represents telephone or video interpreting, and then the blue line, remote simultaneous interpreting for events. Telephone and video interpreting have been on an upward trend for a while, and new trends tied to telemedicine and remote interpreting in general will continue to offer good prospects for remote interpreters. And then remote simultaneous interpreting already existed before the pandemic, but honestly, the use cases were often quite different than now. The market experienced a significant boom once in-person conferences were canceled, and then international and government institutions had to work virtually. Some of that work will eventually go back to in-person, that's for sure, but I've actually just conducted a whole series of interviews with international organizations, and in my talks with these organizations, they won't get rid of RSI altogether after the pandemic. People are finding it helpful to address certain meeting types and scenarios that otherwise would not have necessarily received remote simultaneous interpreting, I should say. Now, I also promised to talk about the translation side, so let's talk about machine translation. So under a quarter of respondents use machine translation on most projects. That may be more than you were thinking, maybe less, I don't know. But when we ask whether they prefer to translate, post-edit, or edit, only 3% prefer to post-edit when given the choice. So why would that be? Well, 4 out of 5 translators find that the quality of the raw empty output varies significantly by client. Some of it is quite bad and some of it is excellent. But overall, the quality is getting decent since already 37% find it good enough to work with. And in our latest COVID survey with freelancers, we found that 86% of them foresee their customers increasing their use of machine translation and machine interpreting. And this validates what we see happening on the buyer side. But let's look at the post-editing growth in terms of before COVID, at the height of the pandemic, and then now. Here, the numbers don't quite align with what we heard from LSPs and buyers. Those two groups had reported an increase in MT usage to process communications faster. We believe that the reason freelancers saw a decrease during the pandemic is some of that machine translated content may probably not have gone through post-editing. And that's something we keep on tracking at this point. We just launched a new big study on machine translation. But what we have to remember is that machine translation brings non-negligible benefits. Half of the translators admit to delivering faster when using machine translation. And when you tie this back to the earlier comment I made about the importance of deadlines to clients, this is vital to meeting client expectations. Now, interestingly, we also find nearly a quarter of respondents who feel they deliver better quality when they use machine translation. And this should give some food for thought to the MT detractors out there. Machine translation also plays a significant role in timeline and cost management. Translator productivity is increasing thanks to experience, but then also technology. And this chart presents data on the number of words per hour that linguists reported when they started in the profession, when we conducted the survey, and then their forecast for 5 years later. Naturally, those that are new to the profession are more likely to start with easier text and may need more research time, which affects performance. What is particularly interesting, however, in this graphic is the fact that linguists haven't reached their peak in terms of productivity yet. They still expect a sizable boost thanks to technology. And this is where the research we've done on the augmented translator is very interesting. It's no longer human versus machine, but more of a cyborg approach where the machine translation empowers the translator, but a translator makes the call. Think of it, if you watch the superhero movies about, Tony Stark, the moment he wears the suit, he becomes Iron Man. And it's a little bit the same thing when you use adaptive machine translation and some of the tools like ACE, etc. So that's, kind of a more advanced use, but that's definitely the way the market is going. To wrap up some of the data section, I want to talk a little bit about the future. So our interest in the future viability of the profession led us to ask whether linguists intend to remain in the profession 5 years from now. And the great majority, if you look at the blue bars, that's 91% altogether, they are likely or very likely to remain translators or interpreters. But that leaves about 9% that were thinking of leaving the business. And they cited health and family reasons, as well as issues with competitiveness and the fear of the impact of technology. This data point was, however, from a pre-COVID survey. Now, only 44% of freelancers remain optimistic about the future of the language services sector in the first half of 2021, and that number increases to 51% for the second half of the year. And everything said and done, it is pretty normal of a reaction when you think about the revenue loss that many experience that I presented on the earlier slides. But let's look at some of the impressions from freelancers regarding the post-COVID future. I'm going to show you a series of pie charts that show the percentage of respondents who believe each statement is either likely or very likely to happen. So the first one here, 61% agree that technology will help them become more productive. And again, we saw that earlier in the presentation when I showed the amount of words per hour that was increasing. However, only a third associate technology with increased revenue potential. Technology is often used to drive costs and timelines down. And altogether, that's a phenomenon that you see in every industry. It's not just with the language services industry. Now, despite amazing stories we keep hearing on mass media about translators and interpreters having gone out of their way to provide language access when their own health may have been at risk, only 30% of respondents feel that clients will now value them more. But at the same time, that's 30% more than was before. So it's probably still sizable enough to be noteworthy. And about a third expect an increased amount of jobs compared to before the pandemic. But they must likely be fearing for their compensation because 54% believe that good paying jobs will be more scarce. So clearly a concern that might affect some of the earlier forecasts we had about staying in the profession. But I have one final data point here for you. As a follow-up question to the main linguist survey where we had asked if they would stay in the profession, we also asked them if they were likely to recommend translation or interpreting as a career to a friend or a family member. And the numbers aren't as strong for this. You only have 66% here that would recommend it and about a third who wouldn't. Now, this figure here could spell trouble for future language supply chains because current linguists may try to stick out to their careers because they're already invested in it. However, frustrations regarding pay and work conditions, as well as the fear of artificial intelligence, tempers their visions of passing the baton on to the next generation of linguists. COVID-19 could both expedite this pattern or bring new blood to the profession who is doing translation as a virtual gig when they can't do their regular job. Again, time will tell, and that's where we as a market research firm have a role to play in continuing to monitor these trends and what is going to happen. Now, I left you with a lot of data. I want to leave you with some thoughts about what to do with this information. And so here are some recommendations for those of you who are linguists in our audience today. So first, if you're translators, you should really master everything tied to augmented translation and machine translation post-editing. If you're interpreters, you really need to work on practicing remote interpreting and using computer-assisted interpreting tools. You should also consider adding some expertise in specialized services. So maybe you want to use your talent to dub videos or write marketing copy in the target language using a brief in the source language. Or maybe you want to gain expertise in multi-language search engine optimization because this is something that is more and more needed by companies as they try to have better websites and better rankings abroad. You also have to really be good at everything tied to a computer. You need to be able to work in different environments with different tools. And don't think that this applies only to translators. Like in different interviews we've had recently, we see that a lot of interpreters are actually taking interest, for example, in what audio technicians are doing, because it enables them to do their job better, and it enables them to provide consulting services to their clients. And then you also need to be very business savvy. You need to know how to build and maintain a website, how to approach clients and how to follow up with them, how to deal with non-paying clients. I wish those didn't exist, but they do, right? And how to manage a balance sheet. Think about it this way. So if you go to have a surgery, you could have a brilliant surgeon who loves to operate but doesn't really like talking to patients. But it's a part of their job and they have to learn to do it regardless. And it's the same for linguists. You may not like having to send marketing emails or cold call or handle collections, but it is part of the job too, and you have to learn to do those things really well. Because provided that you have good language skills and that you have specialization, those skills that I'm showing on this slide will make the difference in whether you're going to have a strong career or not in the long run as the market evolves. Now, I also understand that we have some end clients and then some language service team members from the Capita group here in the audience today. So I also want to share some feedback here. So the first one is to create a humane work environment. You know, having to control cost doesn't mean you have to be ruthless when negotiating with the linguist, or having to reduce timeline doesn't have to mean that you breathe down the neck of the linguist instead of letting them focus on their work. And using vendor portals doesn't mean you should never engage linguists in a conversation. It's all a balance, and you have to nurture your human capital. Second, offer fair rates. Yes, procurement teams may put some pressure on the buyers and clients some pressure on the LSPs, but it is your job to educate them into the amount of work required and what they can get for the rates that they want. You can't expect to pay low rates and have premium service, even though that's what a lot of language service providers and linguists do. It's just not sustainable in the long run. And then another piece of advice here, linguists have to acquire and learn a lot of different tools. Yes, they are freelancers, which means they should manage to do it on their own. But I want to bring a little bit of a more realistic picture for you here. In the data we analyzed, we saw that some of these vendors have over 300 logins to different platforms to serve their different clients. And some of them had over half a dozen translation memory systems. Wouldn't you struggle remembering how each of them works or mastering the intricacies of each system? So provide some guidance so that they learn and excel in the tools you want them to use. And then finally, it's really important that you do your part in developing the talent of the future. Not enough people are showing interest in the role. They worry about the role of machine translation and artificial intelligence and whether there will be a job for them. Some educational institutions are even divesting in language programs, and that means that you need to do hands-on work to generate interest from the usual profiles of candidates that extend beyond what you normally would have targeted. We're seeing, for example, in our research that now machine translation post editors aren't necessarily, translators by trade, but that they are subject matter experts in country that work in a monolingual fashion. So there's lots of changes happening out there. So we have to generate the interest for the professions in the future. Now, I know I shared a lot of data, lots of insights, but I am open to listen to all your questions, and I will let you know what I know and don't know. But Antonio, are you on the line, and do we already have some questions?
Yeah, Helene, thank you so much. I'm going to start first by also making just a personal comment. I think it's one of the things we like about working with Common Sense Advisory is it's how neutral and how realistic the analysis and the research that you guys do. And I think for us, in particular as an LSP, this is a very important research. It's a very important piece of understanding what is in reality our blast and source of what we do. I mean, without our linguists, we just wouldn't function. We would have no real place. So I think that the remarks that you make about what the LSP should be doing, I think that's why we like this report, because we go through it and we understand those to try to improve how do we engage with our linguists and with our partners. So thanks for that. That was really useful. So we got some questions. The first one I want to pass on to you is, did you actually test or was the survey including any information around what translators prefer as a machine translation tool? I know it might not be part of this report, but you probably got some data from the others. I know you got other research documents referring to that, but could you enlighten us a little bit with that one?
Yeah, so we have not asked as part of this research what the linguists prefer, but one of my colleagues right now, we have an MT specialist, just launched a survey where I saw a preview of what he was doing. There were a series of questions about what tools were used, which ones were preferred by language. So this is something where we'll get some insights from buyers, from language service providers, and I believe he also has a path for the freelancers for that survey too. So I don't have the data yet, but one of these days we will. And it really varies by language. And the problem, I'll be honest, with this type of data is that what is true today could be no longer true tomorrow, because this technology moves very fast. There's a lot of training, new solutions all the time. So it's really hard to work as fast as the market is working. And typically the people who work day to day with this will notice the changes before we can really get the impressions from people on what systems they prefer.
Thank you, Helen. That's really good. Another really good question around technology. So, what kind of interpreting software, when you're referring to be trained on remote interpreting software? I know you guys have done quite a lot of study around remote interpreting platforms, but so the question is again referring to where could they be trained up to in? So, what software would you say they would need to be trained on?
Yes, so it depends if you want to do consecutive or simultaneous interpreting. For consecutive interpreting, the easiest is to kind of become a provider with one of the companies that offer telephone or video interpreting, and they'll usually provide training in the tool. The training isn't very complex because it's nearly the same thing as in person. There's way less differences than with simultaneous interpreting. With simultaneous interpreting, you would want to work with remote simultaneous interpreting providers. A lot of the platforms, Kudo, Interpretify, etc., provide some training. Some is paid, some is not. And there's also a lot of work that is being done by some consultants in this area that provide training for interpreters that want to learn those skills. So if you follow, in groups, I think it's on Twitter, there's Chirp Tools, I think is a handle for that. You see a lot of activity of people mentioning ways of getting some education on those topics. There's even some platforms, don't ask me the name, I don't remember which one it is, but that provide technology for people to practice those skills using technology so that they're ready by the time they want to offer those services to a language service provider or a client. But very often, because it's still new, those either LSPs, clients, or tech vendors will provide some degree of training. But the more training you have, the better.
Thank you, Helen. We've got, this is I guess a very good question, because it's one I feel quite close to, but the question is, do you think remote interpreting is here to stay?
Absolutely. It's even here to increase. Now, that doesn't mean that in-person interpreting will disappear. What we're seeing is that it's increasing also the amount of interactions that benefit from interpreting. So just like machine translation is not killing human translation, it's actually enabled to grow the amount of content that gets translated. Remote interpreting is not killing the in-person. Now, it cannibalizes a little bit of the revenue, but it still brings more revenue altogether. And then on top of it, you also have machine interpreting. So where it's kind of a concept of machine translation, but you have speech recognition, creates a script that is cleaned, that is machine translated, and then either read as a subtitle, or that is, you can have voice synthesis to provide pure machine interpreting. Those are technologies that are out there. They're making some fantastic strides. I've used myself and done some presentations with it. The results, yes, there's some funny things along the way, but they are interesting, and there's opportunities for linguists who want to work with tools like that to help refine the tools for the future. But remote interpreting is here to stay. And I just did a series of interviews with heads of interpreting department at different international organizations. And one of the questions that I asked is, okay, so now that's pretty much all you do. What will you do later? And all of them uncovered situations where before they would have never thought of doing it remotely, even though they knew the technology existed, and that now will be done remotely moving forward. So think about it. For example, you have a lawsuit at a international court. Before, you had meetings to prepare for it, and you would fly everybody to go to that meeting just for a preparation meeting. You'll still have the trial in person with some simultaneous interpreter, but maybe those meetings that occur before and maybe a follow-up after, you don't need to fly people for that anymore. You'll use remote interpreting. So there's absolutely zero question that remote interpreting will go away. It will take a little bit of the in-person work, but mostly it will open new doors. Look at what telemedicine is doing. Who did the telemedicine appointments before a year ago, right? And now probably most of us have at least experienced one. And those are situations where now there is remote interpreting. Telemedicine is forecasted to still continue after that. That doesn't mean you don't go to the doctor. That just means now there are other options, and there will be a need for remote interpreting.
Definitely. I mean, just to throw some of our data in there, but we've during 2020 on the same customers, not taking into consideration new customer growth, but on the same customers, remote interpreting has grown 158% in a year, just on the same customers. And having said that, you would think, well, we've just replaced it by, replace face-to-face by remote, but actually, our face-to-face suffered a drop, particularly on the NHS, but areas of face-to-face interpreting, particularly, for example, police in the UK, have actually seen a rise even during COVID. So not necessarily one replaces the other. I think they will live together. But yeah, for us, for example, remote growth in 2020 on the same customers, and not even talking about new customer acquisition, is grown dramatically. And some of the people probably in the call, some of our interpreters who have been converted from face-to-face to remote could vouch that. But yeah, thank you. That's really good. We've got quite a few questions here. A very quick question again, a little bit around technology, but let me just grab this one. I think it's. Is it any benefit of using also Mac? So do you think, do you think translators with capacity to use Macintosh and is that still, I mean, this is almost a question I will ask when I started translating, because we used to have that debate between Macintosh and PC, but.
Yeah. So it depends what services you provide. There is a benefit in at least knowing how these platforms operate, and if possible, having one available, because, sometimes there's a little less translation work, but there's plenty of other language services you can do. There's lots of testing that may need to happen for clients. They want to test their, their website both on a Mac and a PC, in Safari, for example. If you're able to have the expertise to conduct any product testing on a Mac, it provides you the ability to say, yes, I can do usability testing of this app you want or something like that. So knowing both systems helps. It's not a requirement, but just think about opening the door to opportunities that otherwise you might not be qualified to accept.
Yeah, thank you. This is maybe a bit of a one for the UK, or more specific to the UK, but do you think due to Brexit there will be a reduced demand in interpreting, which I imagine it prefers interpreting in the UK?
So I will be honest, Antonio, you probably know way more about this than I do, so I won't even venture an answer. We have not done this, and in all fairness, I believe that the ATC in the UK has been, providing kind of some more local research on that. So I won't venture an answer, but Antonio, did you have a perspective on that?
Yeah, so I mean, so far, yes, we have done some analysis, and the reality is not really at the moment. We haven't seen that or predicted that's going to be the case. And working with ATC as well, we don't think that Brexit is going to have an impact on the reduced demand on interpreting. What it could do is it could shift the languages maybe, but keep in mind that the UK has a large demand for languages that are not non-European, like Urdu or some other languages that would not be affected by a Brexit in this case. But so far we haven't seen that, which is, I would imagine, good news for some of the people on the call.
Yeah.
Helene, on one question here, on the languages that you say that the survey, I'm just going back to your presentation, but there's a question about German was not included on the languages of the responses. Is that any specific reason for that, or any special reason for that?
Yeah, so it was actually, just like every client, we have to figure out where our budget for translation goes, and who knows English well enough that we can get good response rates if we don't translate the survey. Because as you can tell, we captured 155 language pairs. Clearly, we were not going to translate into 155 languages. So we went through a whole exercise on our end to figure out in which languages do we not get many responses when we don't translate. So for example, in Asian languages, when we don't translate a survey, we typically don't get very high response rates. So that's what led to that. So German, yes, we managed to get good response rates without translating. So we allocated that somewhere else. We looked at, number of, speakers of the language. We have one of our analysts who pretty much focuses full time on the analysis of languages and the impact on commerce, etc. So he's the one who made the final selection using way more data than you could dream of to make a simple selection of 14 languages. Though I do admit that, like, we had Swahili, Fula, and there were 3 or 4 like that. Those were provided by Translators Without Borders because they had they really wanted us to capture more respondents from Africa, and it's typically pretty hard to get responses from there. So they translated the survey for that purpose, to make sure that we had good representative samples. A lot of it was because of the African issue.
Excellent, that's very good. One around machine translation and pose editing. So I'll read the whole question for you. The conclusions regarding raw MT output for PMT and the wildly different levels of quality that exist in very much in line with my experience, in this case, the person asking the question on the matter. So do CSA have any ideas as to the reasons for it? And is it having an effect on the widespread adoption of PMT?
Okay, so the reasons for it mostly tie to whether the engines are trained or not. Clients and sometimes some LSPs use untrained engines, and the results can be okay, but more often than not, it doesn't understand the terminology as well. It's as if you took, somebody who wasn't trained being a translator and tell them to translate. Can have some okay results here and there, but usually they don't know the terminology as well. Same thing if you have a very experienced translator, that translator is going to perform better. And that's the same thing with the machine. The machine needs to be trained to generate better results. The machine at this point does not generate perfection. But one of the big things that we talk about in our research is comparing to perfection is not fair, because that assumes that translators don't make mistakes. Translators do make mistakes, right? So it's really comparing to human translation at this point that is more important. And what we see is that the machine is creeping up pretty close in good usage scenarios to the human. Again, that doesn't mean the human needs to feel necessarily threatened, but the human needs to be empowered and use that to improve speed, turnaround time, and especially learn to deal with the price pressure, because there's an expectation that you will use tools to increase productivity. And that's part of the study we do on translation rates too.
Thank you. This is a very interesting one. How are freelancers approaching information security requirements? So, is there any data on the percentage of work that gets distributed by email or held on freelancers' PC? So in general, I think, it's an area that probably we're all seeing, obviously an increasing demand for higher levels of security when it comes to data sharing, and how is that affecting the freelancers? Because obviously as companies, we're all doing our own homework on making sure that we are secure. But I think it's a good question to have you seen any analysis, or have you seen any of that data coming back from the freelancers?
Yes, so we don't have the data directly from the freelancers, although we have data on the freelancers' thoughts on client portals. And let me tell you, it wasn't very pretty. That's actually a section of the survey where there were real swear words that were put in the comments for this one. So what percentage is email versus client portal? I can't tell you. What I can tell you is that we track the language service providers, and I don't have the data in front of me, but I think it's something like half of the language service providers process 90% or more of their projects through a translation or interpreting management system, which usually has a vendor portal. But that doesn't mean the project manager necessarily sends everything that way. So that, and there was, I think, about 80% of the LSPs that have some sort of a translation management system or interpreting management system. So the technology is there at most companies. But let's go back to the security question. So I don't know from the linguist perspective, but I do know from the LSP perspective, because this is a topic we've now had multiple calls with LSPs over the last month. And there is an ISO standard, and the number escapes me. I think it's maybe ISO 24700 or maybe 27 something. The one on security, right?
27,001.
Numbers from the top of my head. Did you know the one, Antonio?
Yeah, 27,001.
There you go. And we're seeing quite a few LSPs ask us whether they need to be certified in that. This matters because it has a downstream impact on the freelancers. So we haven't surveyed the freelancers, but we know that LSPs are making changes to make it harder for linguists to take the data out of whatever systems are provided by the client or the LSP to avoid the data being misused for data protection, and to make sure that it is secure and can't be hacked into easily. Because quite frankly, when you look at how the supply chain is constituted, it should be a fair concern for clients, especially when there's HIPAA rules or whatever applies in the country where you're at. It's pretty easy to have a leak. It's kind of surprising that we don't hear about such on a more frequent basis.
Yeah, I mean, we just from our side, we do spend more and more time now on data protection and data security. That I think every year we're increasing the resources in that area. ISO 27001 being one of the things that we do now, but it's definitely gonna. I think it's gonna increase the level of pressure on the freelancers, because again, the market in general is asking for that, for those, and we're having to be compliant to it more regularly. So, Helen, one more from you here, around sort of in a similar vein as well. It's do you have any records of a trend from LSPs requiring freelancers to have their own liability insurance or professional indemnity insurances, or is it still an isolated thing?
We haven't asked that question, so I can't tell you for sure, but I do see that language service providers are more stressed out by requests from clients. They don't know what to do with them, and especially the smaller language service providers. And in turn, they probably go to and try to pass the buck, if you want, to the freelancer, saying, hey, you need this because my client is asking me for that. We are seeing that the clients are having a much keener interest in security type issues. So, for this 2021, what was a good resolution? Last year, everybody did things remote. They had to. Now it's how do you do things remote in a secure fashion. So, and reducing risk all over the place. So risk management is really the topic of 2021, I think.
Thanks, Helen. Sorry, I'm catching up with all the questions that keep coming through. So I'm sorry, guys, if I miss any questions. What we will do as well, we're recording the whole session, and obviously the questions get recorded as well. So we will make sure that we pass on to Helene, or whether they're for us. Some of the questions you guys are asking are very much almost sometimes personal, in the sense of situations of a particular linguist, maybe with how we work with Capita, or so we will be picking those up as well. Don't think we're not going to take care of those. We will be responding to those as well. We got the record of all the questions, and we'll make sure if they're directly for us, we will respond. If they're for Helen, we'll make sure we get some answers from her and pass it on to you guys. But I got some time for at least a couple of more. So Helen, if you're okay to answer a couple more questions.
Sure.
And now let me see. I think you sort of answered this one a little bit, but what were the common translator concerns about client portals? So what concerns were the translators having about, I guess, client or LSP? I would imagine both.
Yeah, so it's having to manage all these different loggings for starters. So if you recall the slide where I showed, how many hours they work. So imagine you just work 4 or 5 hours a week on the weekend or something like that to do some translation. And in order to do that work, you need to have access to a bunch of different platforms. So we saw in the results that people who do that, they're just not interested in having to have so many tools. They just want to translate. They don't want all that admin thing around it. Then there's the fact that a lot of language service providers seem to be asking for things in duplicate. They're like, oh, post it on the portal, but hey, also send me an email. Double the work for the translator, or they get it twice an email and a request from the system, and that really seemed to aggravate the translators, this duplicate system, because then if it requires the email, then why have the platform in the first place? So there's also a lot of the negotiation techniques through the platforms, where maybe sometimes the project managers aren't necessarily using them very tactfully, and therefore lead to some frustrations from the vendors and anybody who would be on the receiving end of some of those might not necessarily appreciate them. So those are probably the top concerns with them. But the platforms are very different from one company to the other. So research, I don't remember from the top of my head, but it's probably about half the ones that develop their own platform and the ones that use a commercial solutions. The ones with the proprietary platform, they range from absolutely magnificent, excellent to, oh my gosh, I can't believe anybody is using that, and forcing somebody else to work in this system. We saw in the comments a lot of things about the platform is down half the time, and it just doesn't have the functionality. It's just too many clicks. It's not user friendly. And again, keep in mind that linguists need to have access for multiple platforms per LSP, and they work with multiple LSPs. So it becomes kind of a gigantic mess, and they just don't become very tolerant of the subpar systems that are out there, and very fairly so.
So I'm going to jump right on this one with you. So don't feel you need to answer it on your own. But there's a few questions around remote interpreting and sort of the rates or how to get to a position where remote interpreting is as beneficial to the interpreter as face-to-face, in the sense of what. So I'm collating a few questions in relation to payment of remote interpreting in comparison to payment of face-to-face, and how will that be detrimental in relation to the earnings of the interpreter. Anything you guys have analyzed on that in the multiple reports you've done in relation to earnings, depending on remote or face-to-face?
Not as data that we can show you, but we do a lot of work with the buy side, and I have spent hours on the phone with buyers of translation who now all of a sudden are in charge of buying interpreting because of virtual events or something like that. They don't know what they're doing, and they're like, well, the meeting is just 20 minutes. Why do I have to pay for 2 hours, right? So I do personally a lot of education, explaining to them, like, for example, if you do a remote simultaneous interpreting, well, you know what, you might have a 1 hour meeting, but there's probably 2 hours of preparation before. There's a technical rehearsal, there's some extra work on the back end. So having to pay a half day is still normal, right? It is a bit of an unfortunate situation right now, where some of the agencies are paying, really just the minute, when we ourselves are telling the LSPs you can't do that, but some of them we're seeing are playing without the time to prepare for a specific assignment. There are some assignments that people go into without preparation, but for the ones that require preparation, it's true that it's not as beneficial for the interpreter financially. But that's where the LSPs and the freelancers need to communicate better and find ways to make this a sustainable profession, so that people stay in there. If everybody does this for a year or two and then they're all disgusted, then the LSPs will be stranded anyways. And I don't know, Antonio, what Capita even does on that front, but it's probably a concern that you have to handle, right?
Yeah, and actually, this is it almost looked like we have it rehearsed, but because there is a couple of questions pointed, related to what we do in Capita to try and make sure that the translators and interpreters stay in the profession. So I thought it was, it's almost, you almost let me right into it. So yeah, I think, and just to share my views around this, which I think is a critical element of what we need to be doing as LSPs, it's making sure that the conditions of interpreters and translators, the linguists in general in the industry are fair, because otherwise we will all struggle to actually keep this industry going, and we need to make sure, and it's an education process on all sides, and it's not only about, I don't think it's only about rates or in particular just about rates. It's about educating our customers on the value of the service we're providing, because a lot of the pressure is not always coming from the LSP. The LSP is not making, generally, I think I could speak about most of the LSPs I know, and you guys do the analysis on revenue and margin and profit of the LSPs, and you don't see a big change year on year that the LSPs are making more money all the time. In reality, that normally we're either staying pretty much where we were, or would sometimes even make a bit less. But the marketing itself is putting a lot of pressure on price, because it's more content, it's more work, and clients cannot pay as much all the time. But I think the LSPs, we are in the middle to try and make sure that we apply enough technology, that we are efficient, that we find ways of making sure that the time spent for a translator or interpreter during the day working in languages, it's paid fairly in whatever that time is paid off. It might not be words, or it might not be an hour of face-to-face, but the earnings overall, we need to make sure that those earnings are sufficient for those linguists to stay in the profession. I mean, you have something in there that says over 55% of the linguists, we all have a university degree, and most of the times a master's degree. I mean, you'd only study a master's degree to be earning, to be earning way under what normally someone with a degree will be earning. So I think that's part of our responsibility, and we need to take ownership of that part of the responsibility as much as we can. Obviously, within the market constraints, and that goes both for interpreting and translation. In remote interpreting in particular, we're trying to make sure that the earnings of an interpreter who works the same amount of time in remote, that if it was going face to face, is pretty much identical or very similar. And we're hoping that the fact that there's no travel, that you go less. So you got to find a way of how much do you make in your total time of work, rather than maybe thinking about how much do you make on a per word or a per hour basis, or it's about facilitating the overall earnings, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and what we also see is that there's a difference between telephone and video interpreting, for example, because a telephone interpreter can pretty much take a call anywhere and do consecutive interpreting if they must. When they have to be on video and say they have a night shift, they really have to be at their computer dressed properly, right? You can't be in your pajamas at 3 in the morning to take a call if that's what you signed up for. So they're often not paid for these hours they spend sitting in front of the computer. So some of the comments we saw in the survey is that they feel shackled to their computer. They can't even go pick up their kids at school because they feel something's going to come through. They can't pick it up. And some of the LSPs have systems that actually ding the interpreter profile if they don't pick up a phone when they had said, oh, I work 8 to 5, for example, and then they're not there. And then next time they won't get assignments because they didn't pick up at the time that when they had said they would, which also makes it hard to get work from other LSPs and try to work for 2 LSPs at the same time. So lots of technical issues here that have to be resolved for everybody. And it's a market in transition, I would say. And I think organizations like Capita that are trying to tackle this is going to be what changes the market in the long run.
Yes, for sure. Guys, I'm very sorry. We have now run over 10 minutes of time. We do have a few questions on the pipeline. There's quite a few of them, again, are directed to Capita, so no worries, guys. We will pick these ones up, whether through vendor management or directly myself, if they were directed to me, and we will try to respond to those. I want to, Helen, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been great having you and all the insights that you've shared with us. Thank you, all of you attending. I really appreciate you guys spending a bit of time with us and discussing what I think is probably the biggest topic of of our industry, which is our linguists and the guys performing such a great job. And I'm looking forward to hosting another session very shortly. So keep an eye out for Watch the Space, and I'm sure we'll be publishing some more callouts for future sessions. And thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me. I very much appreciate the chance. So good luck to everybody. Continuing, keep your heads up, even if sometimes some of the numbers look a little gloomy. Don't let that take you down.
Definitely, guys. Thank you, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thank you. Bye.